The door closed softly behind Everett Caldwell, and instinct made him stop. He hadn't planned to be home before sunset, hadn't warned anyone, hadn't prepared himself for what he saw through the open sunroom doorway. His twin sons sat on the rug, shoes off, legs folded, bodies still. Nolan faced the window, fingers resting in his lap. Miles sat opposite him, eyes lowered, breathing slow. Between them sat Lena Morales, the maid he barely knew. She wasn't reading, correcting, or redirecting. She wasn't smiling either. She was simply present. Everett's pulse thudded in his ears. For 7 years, no adult had ever been allowed this close. Therapists lasted weeks. Specialists lasted days. His boys usually screamed, rocked, or fled. Yet now, silence held the room like fragile glass. Lena mirrored the twins' posture, spine relaxed, hands open. Nolan hummed once, then stopped. The sound faded, unfinished. Everett felt his throat tighten. Nolan never stopped humming. Never. Miles lifted his hand and pressed his palm to the rug. Lena copied the movement without hesitation. The boys didn't flinch. They leaned slightly toward her, as if gravity had shifted. Everett took one careful step back into the hallway. His mind screamed to intervene, to protect, to manage. That instinct had built empires. It had not built connection. So he did something that felt more dangerous than any business risk he had ever taken. He stayed silent. Hidden in the shadows of his own home, Everett watched the impossible happen and realized this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to the stillness he was terrified to break. He understood, without logic or proof, that interrupting would cost him something sacred, and that some doors, once closed, never reopened the same way again, even when wealth, fear, and love begged otherwise silently. Everett Caldwell believed in systems. He trusted patterns, metrics, and forecasts because numbers never surprised him. People did. His San Francisco office ran on glass walls and quiet authority, but the house in Palo Alto felt different. It was full of rules that never worked. After Adrian died, Everett replaced grief with structure. Therapy schedules were color-coded. Progress charts lined the hallway. Every specialist promised breakthroughs. None explained why his sons recoiled from touch or dissolved under expectation. Control was how Everett survived. It was how he built a company from a rented workspace near Market Street into a global powerhouse. Investors listened when he spoke. Engineers followed when he decided. At home, Nolan and Miles turned away from him as if he were noise. He loved them fiercely, helplessly. Love, however, offered no instructions. The house ran on predictability. Breakfast at 7. Silence after 8. Meltdowns logged, triggers recorded, hope postponed. Everett told himself discipline was kindness. If he managed everything tightly enough, nothing else could be lost. But standing in the hallway watching Lena sit without asking for anything, Everett felt the lie crack. Control had not healed his sons. It had only kept him distant, busy, safe. For the first time, Everett wondered whether letting go might be the risk he had been avoiding all along. It terrified him more than failure. Systems could be fixed. Silence could be managed. But surrender meant trusting something unseen, something human, something he could not optimize, predict, or shield himself from ever again. And deep down, he feared that choice would finally require him to be present with his sons, without armor, excuses, or distance for the first time ever. Everett stood there longer than he meant to, listening to the house breathe without instruction. He wondered how many moments in his life he had controlled out of fear, and how many quiet chances at connection he might have missed because he didn't know how to let go. If you've ever loved someone deeply but didn't know how to reach them, if you've ever stayed silent, afraid that saying the wrong thing might break something fragile, you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest part isn't fixing anything. It's learning when not to interrupt. Have you ever experienced a moment where silence said more than words? Share your thoughts in the comments. Before Lena arrived, Nolan and Miles existed in parallel worlds that rarely touched. Identical in face but different in storms, they moved through the house like separate weather systems. Nolan paced. Miles withdrew. One filled silence with sound, the other hid inside it. Mornings were the hardest. Nolan woke early, humming low and constant, a vibration that seemed to hold his body together. If interrupted, he unraveled. Miles, on the other hand, stayed in bed long after the sun crept through the curtains, eyes open, unmoving as though waking meant surrendering control. They did not play together. They did not fight either. They simply orbited the same rooms without colliding. Therapists called it parallel processing. Everett called it loneliness. Attempts at connection always backfired. Too many words sent Miles into shutdown. Too much silence agitated Nolan. Toys were thrown. Schedules were shredded. Hands flailed. Doors slammed. Everett learned to love from a distance, observing patterns instead of faces. He memorized triggers the way other fathers memorized bedtime stories. Fluorescent lights. Unexpected touch. Raised voices. Questions that demanded answers. He learned to speak softly, move slowly, hope quietly. The boys sensed his restraint and mistook it for absence. There were moments, rare and brief, when Everett caught glimpses of something more. Nolan once aligned his toy cars into perfect symmetry and waited, eyes flicking toward his brother. Miles noticed. He sat beside him for 30 seconds. No one breathed. Then it vanished. Everett lived for those seconds. He built his days around the possibility of more. But years passed and moments stayed moments. Progress reports grew thicker. Expectations grew thinner. By the time Lena walked into their lives, Everett had accepted a painful truth. His sons did not need fixing. They needed understanding. He just no longer believed anyone could give it to them. Lena Morales arrived on a quiet Monday with no resume folder and no questions about the twins. She wore plain clothes, spoke softly, and listened more than she talked. Everett noticed immediately that she did not look overwhelmed by the house. She looked curious. He'd hired her through a local agency after the last specialist quit without notice. Lena came recommended for household support, nothing more. No certifications. No experience with autism listed. Everett almost canceled. Instead he watched. Lena learned the house by observing it. She noticed which floorboards creaked and avoided them. She adjusted the curtains without being asked. She moved slowly as if speed might bruise the air. The first week she barely interacted with the boys. She cleaned. She cooked. She hummed sometimes, soft, tuneless sounds that never demanded attention. Nolan noticed. Miles did too. Everett told himself it was coincidence. On the 5th day, Nolan sat near the kitchen doorway instead of fleeing. On the 7th, Miles didn't retreat when Lena passed him in the hall. Small things. Unmeasurable things. The kind progress reports ignored. Everett asked Lena once if she needed instructions. She smiled, shook her head, and said, "I'll learn." That answer unsettled him. People always arrived with methods, with promises, with solutions. Lena arrived with patience and no visible agenda, as if she trusted time more than technique. Everett didn't know it then, but the absence of expectation was the first safety his sons had felt in years. And it frightened him more than failure ever had. Everett kept the binder on the kitchen counter like scripture. A thick stack of laminated pages labeled Caldwell Home Protocol, written by therapists, consultants, and one expensive behavioral architect, who charged by the hour. It explained everything: safe words, de-escalation steps, preferred foods, forbidden textures, the correct tone for giving instructions. It even included diagrams for where to stand during a meltdown. New hires were required to read it. On Lena's first morning, Everett set the binder in front of her and said, "This will help." Lena glanced at the title, then at him. "I'll look," she said politely. But days passed and the binder never moved. Instead, Lena followed something Everett couldn't see. She watched the twins the way an ocean watches the moon, quiet, steady, unforced. She didn't correct Nolan's pacing. She didn't demand eye contact from Miles. She didn't speak over their silence just to fill space. When Nolan lined up objects, she didn't scatter them to interrupt the rigidity. When Miles retreated, she didn't chase him down with cheerful questions. Everett kept waiting for disaster. It came on a Friday afternoon, the kind of moment that usually ended with screaming. Nolan stood in the hallway, palms pressed to his ears, humming louder and louder, body winding tight. Miles was near the stairwell, frozen, eyes glassy, breath shallow. Everett recognized the warning signs like alarms. He stepped forward, ready to execute the binder's steps. Lena moved first. She didn't touch Nolan. She didn't speak to him. She simply walked to the living room, dimmed the lamp, and sat on the rug where he could see her. Then she began tapping her fingers softly. 1, 2, 3, pause, like a metronome made of skin and patience. Nolan's humming faltered. Miles blinked once like he'd returned from somewhere far. Everett stood in the doorway stunned. Lena hadn't used a single technique from the binder. She'd used presence. And in that moment, Everett realized the binder wasn't protecting his sons. It was protecting him from not knowing what to do. That night, Everett couldn't sleep. He replayed the scene until it felt unreal, like a dream his mind had invented to survive another day. He told himself the twins had simply been tired, that Lena had gotten lucky, that any calm moment could be explained by timing and chance. But the next morning he saw something that made his stomach drop. The boys were at the breakfast table. Not eating, not speaking, just sitting, together. Nolan usually paced during meals, taking bites while moving like stillness was dangerous. Miles usually refused the table altogether, choosing the corner of the couch with his knees tucked up, guarded and distant. Yet there they were, side by side, each with a plate in front of them. And Lena stood behind them, not hovering, not coaxing. She was stirring oatmeal on the stove, her back turned as if she trusted the room to hold. Nolan's fingers tapped twice against the table. Miles answered with the same rhythm, like an echo. Everett's chest tightened. Adrian used to call it their secret language. Back when the twins were small, before the world demanded diagnoses and progress charts, the boys would communicate through patterns, taps, hums, tiny synchronized movements that adults mistook for nothing. Everett hadn't seen it since her death. He leaned against the doorway, careful not to let the floor creak. Lena glanced up, not startled, as if she'd known he was there all along. "Good morning," she said quietly. Everett didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on his sons, on the fragile thread connecting them. Then Lena added, almost like an afterthought, "They like it when nobody talks first." Everett's throat went dry. Because Adrian used to say the same thing. And no one else in the world had ever known that. Everett returned to the hallway without making a sound, the morning scene clinging to him all day like unfinished music. By late afternoon he found himself back in the same spot, watching the sunroom through the narrow gap in the doorframe. The twins sat exactly where they had been earlier, cross-legged on the rug. Lena sat with them, her posture relaxed, her gaze lowered, as though she were listening to something beneath the room itself. No one spoke. The silence was not empty. Pulsed, stretched, breathed. Everett noticed the way Lena timed her breathing to Nolan's shallow inhales, slowing them without instruction. He noticed how Miles angled his body just slightly toward her, a sign so small it would have escaped anyone else. Everett had learned to read signs like these the hard way. A truck passed outside. Nolan flinched. Lena shifted her weight, grounding herself more firmly against the floor. She didn't look at him. She didn't react outwardly. Nolan's shoulders loosened. Everett's heart pounded. This was not coincidence. This was attunement. He remembered rooms full of professionals talking over his sons, praising progress while missing distress. He remembered clipboards, whispered evaluations, promises of eventual breakthroughs. None of them had known when to stop talking. Lena knew. Miles reached out and adjusted the edge of the rug so it lined up perfectly with the wall. Lena waited, then adjusted her own position to match the new line. Miles watched her hands. His fingers relaxed. Everett pressed his palm against the hallway wall, steadying himself. He understood now why interrupting felt wrong. This wasn't an activity. It was a language. A shared rhythm built from patience and respect. For years, Everett had believed connection required effort, explanation, intervention. Watching Lena, he realized it required restraint. And that terrified him. Because restraint meant trusting something he couldn't see working. It happened without warning. Nolan's humming, low and constant like a motor idling, began to soften. The sound thinned, wavered, then broke off mid-note. The silence that followed felt louder than any scream Everett had ever heard. Everett's breath caught painfully in his chest. Nolan never stopped humming. Doctors called it self-regulation. Everett called it survival. He had learned to measure his days by its presence, to sleep through it, to fear its absence. But now Nolan sat still. His hands rested open on his knees. His eyes were unfocused but calm. Miles noticed immediately. He turned his head, slow and deliberate, studying his brother's face as if seeing something new. Lena didn't react. That was what made Everett's knees weaken. She didn't celebrate. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out to freeze the moment in place. She simply stayed exactly as she was, allowing the silence to exist without pressure. Miles shifted closer, their shoulders almost touching. Almost. Everett swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to mark the moment, to acknowledge it, to anchor it in words so it wouldn't disappear. But Lena seemed to know something he didn't. Moments like this shattered when noticed. Nolan exhaled slowly, deeply, as if his body had finally found somewhere safe to rest. The hum did not return. Everett leaned back against the wall, his vision blurring. He felt grief rise unexpectedly, grief for the years he had mistaken noise for normal, for the ways he had tried to manage instead of understand. And in the quiet that followed, Everett realized this wasn't progress. It was trust. And once broken, trust took far longer to rebuild than silence ever did. Lena's voice finally broke the silence, but not in the room Everett was watching. It came from his memory. It's okay if today is heavy. We can sit with it. The words echoed without sound, settling into him like a familiar ache. Adrian used to say that on the worst days, when the boys were toddlers and the world still believed they might outgrow their differences. She said it during hospital visits in Marin County, during sleepless nights when Nolan cried and Miles disappeared inward. She said it the morning she died, pressed against Everett's shoulder as if she already knew what he would lose. Everett hadn't heard those words since. He slid down the wall and sat on the hallway floor, suddenly unsure if his legs could hold him. The house felt smaller, closer, filled with ghosts he had worked tirelessly to bury under schedules and success. He had told himself remembering was weakness. That grief was inefficient. But grief, he realized, had simply been waiting. In the sunroom, Lena shifted slightly, placing one hand flat on the floor. Nolan mirrored her again. Miles watched, eyes sharp and searching. Everett couldn't see Lena's face, but he sensed her awareness, the way she seemed to know when the room needed holding. Adrian had been like that. She listened to what wasn't said. She trusted pauses more than answers. Everett had loved her for it and feared it too. He wondered how Lena could sound so much like someone she had never met. He wondered if it was coincidence or something far more unsettling. The idea that this connection might be temporary tightened his chest. Adrian had been taken without warning. What if Lena left the same way? What if this fragile calm shattered the moment he acknowledged it? Everett pressed his fist to his mouth, steadying his breathing. He understood now why he hadn't interrupted. Some moments didn't ask to be witnessed. They asked to be protected. That evening, after the twins were settled into their rooms, Everett found Lena in the kitchen rinsing dishes. The house was quiet in the way it only became after a long emotional day, heavy but gentle. He leaned against the counter, unsure how to begin. "You didn't follow the protocol," he said finally. Lena didn't turn around. "I know." Everett waited for an explanation, an apology, a defense. None came. She set a plate in the rack, dried her hands and faced him calmly. "I follow them," she said, "not the paper." The answer unsettled him more than defiance would have. Everett studied her face, searching for signs of performance. There were none. Just honesty unadorned. He wanted to ask where she learned this. He wanted to ask why his sons trusted her. He wanted to ask the question forming like a warning in his chest. Instead, he asked, "Have you worked with autistic children before?" Lena paused. "Just long enough." "Yes," she said carefully. Everett felt the gap in the answer. The space she hadn't filled. He nodded, pretending that was enough, pretending he hadn't noticed the way she chose her words. Control urged him to push, to demand clarity, to restore the familiar imbalance of employer and employee. But another instinct, quieter, newer, held him back. Because if he asked the real question, he might hear an answer he wasn't ready for. And some truths, once spoken, changed the shape of everything that came after. Everett let the silence stand. For now. Over the next few days, Everett noticed how Lena spoke. Never in full explanations, never offering more than the moment asked for. She answered questions the way she moved through rooms, gently, without edges. It made him uneasy. People usually tried to impress him. Lena seemed uninterested in being understood at all. Clues surfaced anyway. Everett saw the way she flinched at sudden noises, then steadied herself before anyone noticed. He caught her aligning objects on the counter with quiet precision, not obsessively, but with care, as if order made the world kinder. When Nolan paced, she paced later, alone, tracing the same path as if memorizing it. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Everett heard Lena humming, low, steady, almost identical to Nolan's rhythm. When she realized he was there, she stopped immediately, eyes flicking away, like she'd revealed something private. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" Everett asked. She hesitated. "For bringing noise where it doesn't belong." The word struck him. Adrian used to describe sound that way. Noise as weight, as intrusion. That night, Everett searched Lena's name online. There was nothing. No professional footprint. No social media presence. Just the trace of a community college enrollment years ago in Oakland, then silence. The absence bothered him more than secrets would have. The next morning, Miles followed Lena into the kitchen. Not close. Not touching. But he followed. Everett watched from the doorway, heart pounding, afraid to move. Lena knelt and opened a lower cabinet, handing Miles a bowl without looking at him. He took it. Their fingers brushed for half a second. Miles didn't recoil. Everett's breath left him in a rush. Later, when Lena noticed his expression, she said quietly, "He decides when." Everett nodded. He wanted to ask who had taught her patience like this. who had taught her to wait without expectation. Instead, he asked, "Did someone teach you this?" Lena met his eyes for the first time that day. There was history there. Not trauma displayed. Trauma folded neatly away. "Yes," she said. "But not in the way you're thinking." And Everett understood then that Lena's past wasn't a story she would tell. It was something she carried. The disruption arrived on a Thursday morning, announced by a crisp knock and the sound of unfamiliar voices. Everett hadn't remembered the appointment until the moment the doorbell rang. A new behavioral consultant stood outside, clipboard tucked under her arm, optimism sharpened by credentials. Inside, Nolan stiffened immediately. His humming spiked, pitch rising. Miles back toward the hallway, eyes darting, breath shallow. Everett felt panic bloom. He opened his mouth to intervene, to cancel, to regain control. The consultant stepped forward anyway. "Good morning, boys," she said brightly. It was too much. Nolan clapped his hands over his ears, sound breaking into sharp bursts. Miles froze completely, eyes fixed on nothing. The fragile rhythm Lena had built shattered in seconds. Everett moved toward them, heart racing. Lena moved faster. She positioned herself between the twins and the doorway, not blocking, not confronting, just present. She lowered herself to the floor and began tapping softly, the same measured rhythm Everett had seen before. The consultant frowned. "Sir, this may interfere with—" "Please," Everett said, cutting her off. His voice surprised them both. The tapping continued. Nolan's sounds wavered, then slowed. Miles' shoulders dropped a fraction. The consultant hesitated, clearly unsure. Everett felt something decisive settle in his chest. "We're done for today," he said. The woman protested. Everett didn't listen. He watched his sons instead, watched Lena hold the moment together with nothing but timing and trust. When the door finally closed behind the consultant, Everett sank onto the couch, shaken. Lena looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have warned you." Everett shook his head. "No," he said. "I should have listened sooner." For the first time, he realized how close he'd come to losing everything they'd begun to build, and how easily it could still fall apart. That night, Everett sat alone in his office, the city lights of Palo Alto blinking beyond the glass like distant signals he no longer trusted. His phone buzzed with emails from consultants, follow-ups already drafted, apologies pre-written. He didn't answer any of them. For years he had relied on experts to tell him what his sons needed. Their language had been precise, authoritative, safe. Lena's language was none of those things. It was intuitive, unprovable, deeply human. And it worked. Everett closed his laptop and stared at the reflection in the dark screen. He looked older than he remembered, tired in ways success had never fixed. He thought about Adrian, about how she had once begged him to stop searching for solutions and start paying attention. He hadn't listened then. In the hallway, Nolan's humming drifted softly, steady again but calmer than before. Miles' door remained open, a rare invitation. Everett stood, hesitated, then walked past his office without turning back. In the kitchen, Lena was wiping the counter, movements slow and deliberate. She looked up, unsurprised. "I canceled the rest of the appointments," Everett said. Lena didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She simply nodded once, as if he had finally arrived somewhere she'd been waiting for. "They don't need fixing," Everett added, his voice rough. "They need room." Lena met his eyes. "Then give it to them." The simplicity of the instruction startled him. Everett exhaled, feeling something loosen in his chest. He realized this was the first decision he had made for his sons without consulting a single chart or credential. It felt reckless. It felt right. As Lena turned back to her work, Everett understood the weight of what he'd chosen. trust over certainty, presence over proof. And once chosen, there was no going back. It happened late after the house had settled into its quiet rhythms. Everett found Lena sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. The light above her cast soft shadows, revealing exhaustion she never showed during the day. "You didn't have to stay," Everett said. Lena nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that no longer felt dangerous. Everett spoke carefully. "You understand them in ways no one else has." Lena's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "My younger brother was autistic," she said. Everett held his breath. He didn't talk much. People tried to teach him how. What he needed was space to be heard without words. She paused. "He taught me how to listen." The admission settled between them, heavy but clean. "He died?" Everett asked quietly. Lena nodded once. "A long time ago." Everett felt the familiar ache of recognition. Loss didn't announce itself. It lived in habits, in silences, in the way people learn to carry others with them. "That's why you hum," Everett said before he could stop himself. Lena looked up, startled. "My brother did," she replied. "When the world was too loud." Everett swallowed. "And that's why you don't push." "Yes." She finally met his gaze fully then. "I don't want to replace anyone. I'm not here to be their answer." "What are you here for?" Everett asked. Lena considered the question. "To sit with them," she said, "until they don't feel alone." The words broke something open in him. Everett realized Lena wasn't a miracle worker. She wasn't a solution. She was a witness. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. Progress used to mean measurable change. Fewer meltdowns. Longer eye contact. New words logged and dated. Everett had learned to celebrate improvements quietly, afraid that hope might jinx them. Now progress looked different. Nolan still hummed, but not constantly. The sound came and went like weather, no longer a permanent storm. Miles still retreated, but he returned on his own terms, lingering longer in shared spaces before disappearing again. No one pushed. No one chased. Lena never praised them for being better. She didn't mark moments or announce milestones. She treated each day like it was complete on its own. One afternoon, Everett watched from the doorway as Nolan arranged books on the coffee table, not by color or size but by weight. Lena sat nearby, reading, not interrupting. When Nolan finished, he glanced at her briefly, just a flicker of acknowledgement. Lena looked up. "That feels balanced," she said. Nolan nodded once. Everett's chest tightened. Later that evening, Miles sat on the floor beside Everett's chair while he worked. Not touching. Just there. Everett froze, afraid to breathe too loudly. Minutes passed. Miles stayed. That night, Everett realized something unsettling. If a therapist had witnessed these moments, they might have dismissed them as insignificant. No data. No outcomes. No transformation worth billing for. But Everett knew better now. These weren't steps forward. They were roots. Slow, invisible, and fragile, but capable of holding far more than any quick success ever could. The house began to change in ways Everett couldn't explain to anyone else. Mornings no longer felt like preparation for battle. Nolan sometimes waited at the kitchen table without being told. Miles wandered into rooms he had once avoided, touching walls, studying light, testing safety. The air felt lighter, as if the walls had stopped listening for screams. Everett found himself lingering instead of rushing. He brewed coffee slowly. He noticed the way Lena hummed while cooking, how the boys adjusted their movements to match her rhythm. The house moved together now, imperfect but aware. One afternoon, Everett laughed out loud when Nolan slid a folded napkin across the table toward Miles. It wasn't sharing, not exactly. was offering. Miles examined it carefully, then placed it beside him. No one commented. Everett felt tears sting his eyes anyway. He thought about the years he had spent trying to force the house into calm. How every solution had tightened something instead of loosening it. He understood now that peace wasn't something you installed. It was something you allowed. That evening, Everett joined Lena and the boys on the rug without announcing himself. He sat cross-legged, awkward and uncertain, copying their posture. Nolan glanced at him, then returned to his pattern. Miles shifted but didn't leave. No one asked Everett to do anything. That was the invitation. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the room, Everett felt something he hadn't felt since Adrienne's death, a sense of belonging that didn't require performance. The house wasn't fixed, but it was alive. And for the first time, Everett believed that was enough. Everett didn't announce himself when he lowered himself onto the rug. He moved the way Lena had taught him without instruction, slowly, deliberately, as if the floor itself deserved respect. His knees protested. His spine felt unfamiliar in this position. He ignored it. Nolan noticed first. His eyes flicked toward Everett's hands, open and resting on his thighs. Miles noticed second, the way he always did, by registering change before reacting to it. Neither boy pulled away. Everett felt his pulse hammer. He told himself not to speak, not to explain, not to try. He matched Nolan's breathing, shallow at first, then deeper. He waited for Miles to decide what Everett's presence meant. The waiting felt endless. Everett had built companies faster than this. He had closed deals in minutes that affected thousands of lives. This felt harder. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time softened around them. Nolan adjusted the books on the rug, sliding one closer to Everett's knee. Not touching. Testing proximity. Everett didn't move. He kept his hands still, his breath steady, his attention wide and quiet. Miles shifted closer to Nolan. Their shoulders brushed briefly, then stayed. Everett felt something collapse inside his chest. Not pain, not joy, but release. He realized he had been standing guard his entire life, braced for loss, armored against hope. Sitting on the floor with his sons, he understood what Adrienne had meant all those years ago. Love didn't need direction. It needed permission. Lena watched from across the room, her expression unreadable, respectful of the boundary Everett had finally crossed on his own. She didn't guide him. She didn't rescue him from uncertainty. She trusted him. Everett stayed on the floor until the light shifted and the boys rose on their own terms. When they left the room without distress, Everett remained seated, stunned by the simplicity of what had happened. He hadn't fixed anything. He had arrived. And sometimes arrival was everything. Weeks later, Everett came home early again. The house greeted him with quiet movement instead of tension. From the hallway, he saw the familiar scene unfold on the sunroom rug. Nolan and Miles sat cross-legged, bodies angled inward. Lena sat with them, her hands resting on the floor, her presence steady. Everett stopped where he was. He watched Nolan tap once, then twice. Miles answered. Lena didn't mirror them this time. She waited. The boys adjusted on their own, settling into a rhythm that belonged only to them. Everett felt the old instinct rise, the urge to step in, to mark the moment, to anchor it with words. He recognized it now for what it was, fear disguised as involvement. He stayed still. From his place in the hallway, Everett understood something that had taken him years to learn. Interruption wasn't always action. Sometimes it was ownership. Sometimes it was the need to prove a moment existed by touching it. This moment didn't belong to him. The boys leaned closer together, not touching but choosing shared space. Lena's gaze softened, then lifted briefly toward the doorway. She saw Everett. She didn't signal him in. She didn't send him away. She trusted him to know. Everett stepped back just enough to give them room. His heart felt full in a way that didn't demand more. He turned toward the kitchen, letting the scene continue without him. As he walked away, he realized the house no longer felt like something he managed. It felt like something he shared. Later, when Nolan hummed softly in his room and Miles left his door open, Everett paused outside their rooms, listening. He didn't interrupt then either, because he finally understood that love didn't always speak. Sometimes, it watched quietly from the hallway, learned patience, and chose not to interfere with miracles that were growing exactly as they should. Everett stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet he no longer feared. He knew now that some love didn't announce itself. It showed up gently, stayed patient, and trusted the moment to unfold on its own. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or a moment you almost missed, take a second to let us know. Like the story if it made you feel something. Leave a comment and share what part stayed with you the most. And subscribe if you'd like to hear more quiet stories about love, patience, and the moments we learn not to interrupt. Sometimes the stories that stay with us the longest are the ones that speak softly.